I got a guest today, Brian Smith. I worked with him in narcotics and a couple other places. He had a really cool story, originally from New York. I'm going to let him talk about that a little bit. Pretty quickly, we'll know that that's where you're from. So tell us a little bit about where you're from and just kind of what it was like to grow up in New York.
Okay. So born and raised in New York, the normal part of New York, because you got the city and you got the island, and then everything else sort of north of Westchester is like Virginia.
Okay.
Just what, people know how to speak English and know how to drive, and the food's decent, but it's very rural up there. But yeah, from New York, born and raised there.
The city, right?
And just outside the city. So the outer boroughs and at Long Island, just what it was like growing up there. I don't know. I mean, I lived in rough neighborhoods, grew up, fighting all the time, and, not especially well off or anything like that, but you don't know. I mean, when that's all you know, that's what you know. So,
so what did like an average day in New York look like? So what did your parents do for a living?
So my dad, was a fireman.
Okay.
And he'd be at work a lot.
All right.
Sometimes he'd be at work for days. You didn't see him. And then my mom, she held a lot of different jobs. Okay. She always had like some interesting job. People always like, how did you end up with this job? But, never really stuck with some of them. But anyway, my dad used to break at chops, like all these jobs you get end up costing us more money than it ends up, generating. But,
right.
So she was home, when she wasn't doing other things, but it was, I wasn't exactly a stable house. My parents eventually got divorced. And it was chaotic. The adolescence was out of control.
Yeah.
Stayed in trouble, but not enough where, it ended up me and
anybody came to look for you.
Oh yeah. People came I told my dad one time, I said, I had a bunch of my buddies over and, just kind of hanging out or whatever else. And it was like prank called some guy. I don't even know who the hell he was. And, 2:00 in the morning, I think we were probably 14, 15 years old, drinking and just carrying on. And
right.
Next thing I know, somebody's beating on my front door. I'm like, who the hell is this guy? Next, kicks the door open. Some man starts chasing me through my house. I'm like, who the hell is this guy? And he's yelling and cursing at me, telling me he's got, I'm making these threats, but he's got all this pressure from the mob, and who do I think I am? And I remember I found a utility knife. Yeah. And me and this guy are tangled up in the closet. I'm holding a utility knife to this guy's throat like a maniac. And eventually we got to this point. Yeah. And eventually we got to this point where we're like, all right, man, all right, yeah, let's
negotiate.
And then the guy just sort of like leaves.
Right.
And he was like, turns out he was like, he knew one of my friends who was another degenerate. And so I remember telling my dad like the day or two later, I said, he has a crack in the door. Some guy kicked the door in and chased me around the house. He's like, okay. It just didn't even faze him. Like not a lot. I can be honest with you. My dad was very inflammable. Yeah, he had very little phase, that man. But anyway, grew up in a rough way. Okay. But it shapes you. So helps you to.
So you go through your childhood. What was it like going to school? Like how many people were in your high school?
I think my graduating class had 1,800 people. I mean, it was pretty big.
It was a lot of. You said you didn't know everybody.
No, I didn't know anybody.
Wasn't like Cheers.
Well, I mean, I knew people, but yeah, it's not like here. God knows. I mean, everybody knows everybody's. It's like this weird interconnected web.
So you did meet a stranger up there. Like here, you don't ever meet a stranger.
Yeah,
there.
No.
Yeah. So you go through high school. You eventually went into service. What drove you into service?
I grew up around. My dad, like I said, was he was in the Marine Corps. Then he got into the fire service back in 1978.
Okay. So was he in Vietnam?
So he was on the coast of Vietnam.
Okay.
He joined the Marine Corps in 1972 and left in 74.
Okay.
I think he was when he got into the Marine Corps, I think that he had this vision of what he thought that was going to be. And at the time, the Marine Corps had some issues, I think, but I think that it just didn't meet
what he thought it was.
Yeah. And so he got out after a couple of years. And so he got out in 74. And he was a mechanic. He was a mechanic in the Marine Corps. And he like I said, New York City at the time was, they were just going through a bankruptcy, and they laid off all these people and all this, and including public safety people.
Okay.
And so my dad was the first class that got hired that was not the pink slip rehires.
Okay.
So in 1978,
They start rehiring everybody back.
they rehired all the people they laid off. And then in 78, my dad got on, and he ended up in a engine company in Brooklyn.
Okay.
And so it was always around that, growing up.
Do you ever remember going to like firehouses? And
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, we grew up in a firehouse, you know, and every year on my birthday, my dad would take me in, get to spend the night at the firehouse.
That's awesome.
Got to sleep in the bunk room. There would be a call. You get on the back of the truck. I mean, I remember being a kid, answering calls and people holding me while I'm sitting on the back step of the fire truck. We go to some fire, and eventually my dad got into another company, which wasn't nearly as exciting. But he still, every year my birthday, would take me in, go answer calls. Next morning, get up, eat breakfast with the guys, and then go watch a Yankee game.
Oh,
and
awesome. So you're not a Mets fan?
No, not at all.
You like teams that win?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of. I could talk about the Yankees forever, but my grandfather. So my grandparents on both sides, they hit the mainland here in the 20th century.
Oh,
So we got nothing to do with the war or anything else that everybody gets all wound tight about. But my grandfather, my dad's side, everybody ended up in, around Brooklyn, and so anyway, he went to Yankee games with his father, watching, Babe Ruth or Lou Gehrig. So my dad growing up, would go to Yankee games with my grandfather, watching Mickey Mantle and, Roger Maris, Whitey Ford and all that. And so, that tradition had kind of carried on. So, I mean, we've been Yankee fans for 100 years.
So they schedule a game just for you on your birthday then?
Sometimes it would be around my birthday. Sometimes they do it like on the 17th instead of the 15th, but
but that was part of your ritual.
Yeah, it was. That was cool.
You'd spend the night. That was your birthday.
Oh yeah. That was awesome. So, to answer your question about, what drove me to service, it was a natural fit for me.
Right.
I was around that. My dad and I had, times, especially through my adolescence, it was a strained relationship.
Right.
And, of course I love my dad, and, it was so much going on. And, you just kind of find your way through adolescence, which is never an easy journey for anybody. But so I get to a point where, in 95, I end up getting interested in, like volunteer fire service, volunteer fire company that was near where I lived. And I remember at that time, it was like I had conversations with my dad on a level I never did before. Cause we were talking about, like, hey, if you stretch 1 3/4 line for this kind of distance and you have this, and like that dude was rattling stuff off, and I was able to connect with him in a way that like I just never had before. Again, like I said,
more relatable at that point.
It was, and so I was very much drawn to that. Okay. Now, I always wanted to get into police work, even though my dad was a fireman. I grew up on Chips and Starsky and Hutch, and I just wanted to,
good shows. Yeah,
go out and chase bad guys, and it looked like a lot of fun. But I always said, hey, if I got stuck in the fire service, it's not a bad gig, Everybody loves you. You show up, it's a
you eat 3 meals a day, usually on time.
Get to hang out with your friends. I mean, it's a tough life those guys got. But so that initially, drew me to that
right
public service. It was just something that was kind of
ingrained.
It was ingrained in us.
Okay. So when did you get hired by the fire department full time? Fire Department New York.
So I was working for a federal research facility.
Okay.
In Plum Island, which is off the coast of Long Island. It is run by the USDA, and they do animal testing. And it's a decommissioned military base.
Okay.
And that is where the government, until like the 1950s, that's where they did testing for biological and chemical weapons and stuff like that till they shut all that down. Okay. Well, there's still some remnants of what they did over there. And the place is it's really cool. Oh. I mean, honestly, like there's like all these old bunkers and stuff from World War II.
Oh, okay.
And they're underground bunkers with tunnels, but it's all overgrown with vegetation. So it's like Indiana Jones. So we get out, start walking around, check out all these cool things, but you had to slaughter like every animal on the island.
Okay.
right? Because they had had outbreaks and stuff out there. So everything that touched the island, they had to kill. I never killed them. I'm not into killing animals.
Okay.
I don't mind eating them, but the whole killing part makes me sad.
You're-
So but the only two things that were allowed to live on the island were the ospreys and seals. Seals that come up on the beach and but everything else, never knew it. But deers can swim. They swim right off the mainland, and those got those little hooves, but they just float like barrels, and
Right.
across they go, and they come over there, and there's no competition for food, so they were happy as can be. Raccoons, you name it. I mean, all kinds of
But
wildlife.
you had to kill them?
I didn't have to kill anybody, but the government did. Oh yeah, they would come in, they set up big piles of apples or salt or whatever else, and these guys would be sniping them out in the trees in the middle of the night, and then in the morning, they'd have to necropsy all the animals. So they would come into the lab, and there's doors on the outside, and they put them in, close it, and then the scientists will pull them in and make sure they didn't have any diseases and all this.
Okay.
So it was this whole thing, and then they would burn up parts of the island. Man, there would be crazy things that would happen at that place. But anyway, I could
Name
talk
one
for-
crazy thing.
So one time we're out there, and so one thing we would do is like light it on fire. We'd have controlled burns. So we had a flamethrower.
Oh.
And, so you'd burn up a lot of this vegetation, because if there's no vegetation, you don't have to worry about the animals. Or it'd be easier to find the ones, I guess, you wanted to kill. So anyway, so we burned up all this vegetation, and it's sandy. And you look down at the ground, and there's these vials. Pick it up, it's like a glass vial, and it's just unmarked. It's just some clear liquid. And I'm like, what the hell is this? I don't know, like, there's some more of it. Next thing you know, it's all over the place. Joe, God knows what was in it. But we just start backing out real quiet. Make sure you don't step on them and break any vials. You just call whoever, and the EPA, and somebody comes in and just does their thing, and off they go.
Like, you don't need to know.
Oh yeah, I mean, things like that all the time. But but inside the lab, they got all these animals they would experiment on. So you had animal handlers inside there, and some guy goes in there, breaks his hip, like getting bumped against a wall by a pig. Well, first of all, it's an island. So how do you get this guy out of there? Plus, he's in a BSL-4 lab. I mean, you can't just carry him out. So you go in and out of the lab naked. So you take your clothes off, you go inside, you got clothes on the dirty side, you conduct business on there, and then you come out and you got to get scrubbed down, and then out you go. So anyway, we go in there, get this poor guy.
Concentration camp.
Oh yeah, it was.
You got to leave.
Yeah, you don't have a lot in the way of dignity, because there's no secrets there as far as that goes. So anyway, you go in there and you got to wheel this guy out and scrub him down, and you're talking to the nurses on the dry side, who are all clothed, of course, and you're out there, like trying to get scrubbed yourself, and then you come out and you got to get this guy in a helicopter to fly him out, and anyway, it's a wild place, man. But anyway, so while I was there, I was put an application in. Civil service in New York is very different than it is down here in Virginia. But you got to take a test. You're on a list. It's a whole process, man. It takes a while. Anyway, I got a call, and got to a point where I was getting hired, and I was like, yeah, this sounds like fun. And so off to the academy I go.
Where's the academy for the fire department?
That's in Randall's Island.
Okay.
So all of our stuff is at Randall's Island and Fort Totten, from where a lot of the training that I had. And so at that point, I already had, because of a lot of the trainings and stuff that I had all kinds of hazmat training and, EMS training and, BLS, ALS, you name it. And some other things that kind
Look
of
good. They kind of push you
yeah,
into it.
and ended up pushing me into a special operations unit when I first got out.
Okay.
So, so I finished the academy, and like the day before you graduate, they tell you where you're going.
Right.
So at the time, I'm living on Long Island, and you have this list, your wish list. Where you're going to end up? You're going to end up here, there. So I wanted to go to Queens because it was the shortest commute.
Right.
I had this list. It was 7 choices, and the last choice on the list was the North Bronx because it was the furthest away from my house. And it was a captain that was running the academy at the time, real ball breaker. And I didn't have any issues with the guy, but he hated the guy that I commuted with. Hated him. Just, it was a shame. The guy he was a good dude. He's a little goofy, but it just rubbed this guy the wrong way.
Right.
And he used to talk about, he's like, I will find out where you live and I will send you to the place furthest from it. And son of a bitch, he did.
You.
Oh, yeah. So I ended up in this battalion up in North Bronx. And first day I go in there, they show me around. I said to the captain, I said, this is a beautiful firehouse. I said, but I gotta be honest with you. I can't work here. Like, I got to fill out paperwork. I said, it was like 90 miles one way. You know, plus I had to pay tolls going over the Whitestone Bridge. So I said, this is not going to work. And I remember I called my dad. I said, you got to know somebody. He said, yeah.
Dad at that point.
So my dad was working.
Did he have rank or he just knew everybody?
He knew everybody. So so my dad got detailed to a company in Queens called Hazmat. Okay. When it first started in 1984, my dad's a charter member.
Okay.
And so he was in Hazmat up until about 97. And then he gets detailed to Mayor Giuliani's office. He works for Office of Emergency Management.
Okay.
Like he would go into work every day, suit and tie.
So he knew people.
Oh, yeah.
He definitely knew some people.
Yeah, he knew people. And so I said, Dad, you got to help me out here. Like, this isn't going to work. So he was in, worked for Giuliani's office for a couple of years. And then he eventually come back out to Hazmat. But so he said, yeah, I'll call somebody. I said, what I could do. I said, all right. So I waited a little while and I called him up. I'm like, what, did your contact ever call you back? Like, what, like I gotta make a decision here. And I had a buddy of mine call him up. He's like, yeah, let me get a phone call from Chief. He said, hey, this is Chief Goldfarb. He's like, I understand you want to come to Brooklyn. I said, yeah, I would love that, Chief. He's like, all right, done. And, a lot of that stuff was who you know. And then I ended up going down to Brooklyn, thank God. Cut my commute by 20 miles, no more tolls. It only took me an hour to get to work. I was like, this is wonderful. Right. Compared to what I got now, it's
so how long were you at the station you didn't like?
Not long, a few months maybe.
I mean, that's still a long time.
It was a long time, and it was rough, man.
And the dude didn't like you just because of your buddy.
Yeah, had nothing to do with me. And the people at the station, everybody was nice, whatever else. So anyway, I ended up in this battalion down in Brooklyn, downtown Brooklyn, which was adjacent to, so it was Battalion 31. And I worked at a special operations unit. It was called HazTac. Okay. So we did, we did EMS, we did ALS, BLS types of intervention. We were also a support unit for the rescue companies, for hazmat, for all the squads, and we were a citywide response unit. So anything that was a 1 alarm fire in the borough, we would handle. Okay. We get deployed to. Anything that was above a 2 alarm fire, we could get deployed citywide. Plus, we were first line terrorist response unit. We had the hazmat suits, the whole thing. Like we can go in and deal with all sorts of things like that. And so it was great. I mean, it was so where we were stationed. Where that station is it's pretty close to Bedford-Stuyvesant, Park Slope, which is a really nice part of Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. And then you go a few blocks further, and then it starts to get pretty rough fast. And where I worked, especially at the time, as young as I was, it was wonderful, man. I mean, it was hard. The hours were hard. The neighborhood was hard.
What were the hours like for y'all?
So I was at work all the time, and you could work like mutuals and stuff, so you can pick up other people's shifts. And there were times I'd be at work for days, or I would sleep at work because I knew my next shift would be coming up. And then there were times where you're off, and so of course. With where we worked, we were busy, man, all the time. And I went to the academy with people that used to get what we call no-hitters. They work a whole tour and they wouldn't get a single job. They're like, yeah, we just came to work and hung out and went home. I said, well, that must be nice. Because I could tell you, we never had any no-hitters. But to be honest with you, like I said, where I was at the time, I was happy, man. Because, I mean, as soon as we were clear from a job, we had another one waiting for us. And we saw a lot of work, a lot of trauma. The EMS side of things were just.
So the trauma, I mean, I know working in, in rural areas and things like that, the trauma you had was a lot of it's like car accidents and stuff like that. What was the trauma like in New York?
Violence, man. So people getting shot and stabbed all the time. I mean, it was a nightly occurrence. I mean, so. You go in there, and there were times we'd pull up on scenes, and people would still be running around. There'd be somebody bleeding in the middle of the street. We'd just kind of scoop them up, and then, throw them in the back of a bus, and off we'd go. And then you just wash up and move on to the next job. And, so a lot of that I had, really, housing projects, 30, 40 stories high. And it's just, housing projects on top of projects on top of projects, and not nice areas. And, and because of the socioeconomic situation that we were in, that we were working in, a lot of the violence that kind of comes with that. Plus we'd see, I mean, in the time I was there, I delivered 21 babies.
Really?
And, it was, again, for the experience part of it, it was great, man. Like, it just exponentially, compared to what I would have gotten in a place that was, slower as far as jobs experience wise, it was great, man. I mean, and like I said, at that point you're young in your career, you're a trauma junkie.
Yeah.
The more you get, be like, oh man, let me see the next one. And just couldn't get enough. I mean, you just
Right.
eat it up. And,
So here's a question. So you said earlier, like you did the counterterrorism stuff or anti-terrorism stuff.
Yep.
So that would have been like right after the first World Trade Center bombing.
I was
correct?
before.
Was it
So,
before then?
so I went through, because of my connection with my dad and his connection with Giuliani, I had counterterrorism training through the fire department and through the city of New York because they did different things. And a lot of that background, kind of led into where I eventually ended up on the special ops unit. So, and my dad, even when he was an OEM, they trained for terrorism. They expected terrorism. Of course, they were familiar with the first bomb in '93 at the Trade Center.
So when did you graduate from the fire academy?
So I came out in 2000.
Okay, so you had the first World Trade Center bombing like in the garage.
So that was in 1993.
93.
I was in high school at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, my
That's what
dad
I
was there
saying.
at the time.
So, but at that point they were like, hey, I think New York had always thought like, hey, we're a legitimate target.
Oh yeah, no question.
But like that kind of, to me, the limited knowledge I had, that was kind of like a wake up call. Like, hey, they really are trying to hit us.
It was, but not like September 11th was.
Right.
And the gravity. I think the human nature. I mean, you think about the kind of wake up call that 9/11 should have been. And how the years have progressed, and people just
They're complacent.
Yeah, and it just gets to a point of like, well, okay, well, I woke up, I'm fine today, everything was okay, so I guess tomorrow will be okay too, and just the blissful ignorance of the kind of evil that's out in the world that people just choose not to think about or just don't know about or whatever. But
I guess if you're not prepared for it or you don't train for it,
sure,
it's easier to just stick your head in the sand and hope for the best.
Yeah.
So you were having counterterrorism training. How long were you at that really busy station?
Until I came to Virginia.
Okay. All right. So kind of just walk through like what happened for you on September 11th. So you said you were picking up a bunch of different shifts. So like, what was it like to be, so you're saying wide open all the time, all the trauma and everything else.
All the time.
So from your fire station in Brooklyn to the World Trade Center, how far a ride was that?
5 minutes.
Okay.
I mean, we're in downtown Brooklyn. So we're right at the base of the Brooklyn Bridge.
Okay.
And right on the other side of the Brooklyn Bridge is downtown Manhattan.
Okay.
Down by the financial district, which is of course where the Trade Center complex is. So I say 5 minutes, depends on traffic.
But you can see it from where you're
Oh
at.
yeah. Oh yeah. No, you can see the whole part of the skyline down there. So I'd worked a shift before.
Okay.
And we were up all night, running jobs, whatever else. And, we ended up catching a late job that held us up a little bit. But anyway, we get back to the station. And one of the guys I worked with, his name is Brian Gordon. And he was living in Manhattan at the time. But to get to the subway station where he would have to take to get back home, he'd either have to walk through the projects, which you don't do. So he'd have to either do that or I'd give him a ride. So I'd give him a ride. So we were walking out towards the parking lot and I heard the explosion from the North Tower. And when I looked up and I could see the fireball coming out of the building. I didn't see the plane go in, didn't hear the plane.
You just saw the flame.
And what happened was I heard, I guess by the time the sound got across the East River to where I was, at that point, the explosion was still, so I looked at Gordy and I said, hey, someone just blew up the World Trade Center. And so we were making our way back to the truck that we worked on. The next shift was taking it over. So, you do different things at the beginning of the shift. You check your meters and make sure your gear was right. And, there's a lot of equipment on the truck that you had to make sure it was good for the shift. So
y'all stuff had already rotated off.
Yeah. I mean, we were in civvies. And so we go running back and these guys were getting ready to go on duty. And so we said, look, someone just blew up the World Trade Center. So that we knew that the unit was going to get deployed. And so we said, the guys that were there, and he said, you want us to wait for you? I said, no, go. We'll catch up. We'll just grab a spare unit. So we go running inside the station, and the lieutenant that was on duty, his name was Chris McCarthy. Good guy, big dude. And, he's just kind of sitting at the desk or whatever. And we come running in. We're like, Lou, someone just blew the trade center up. We need keys to a truck. And he's like, I'm sitting in front of the TV. I'm sitting next to the radio. I think if someone blew up the trade center, I would know about it. Like if you guys need overtime, you don't need a story. And no sooner does he say that to the news footage of this gaping hole in the side of this building, this close up, just the paper and the smoke and that comes across the radio, attention all Brooklyn North units, and MCI has been announced in the borough of Manhattan, and they start pushing out all the information.
And what is the MCI?
Mass casualty incident.
Okay.
So at that point, of course, we knew we were going to go to work, and I grabbed keys off the board, and it was for a spare ambulance. That hadn't been put into service, but had lights, had wheels. I said, this will get us there. We'll catch up with everybody when we get downrange. And so I gave a set of keys to Gordy, grab radios, and Gordy had his uniform and stuff on because he would wear that to get on the subway, so he didn't have to pay the fare. But, I had to get changed. I had regular clothes and stuff on. So I was like, I got to grab my gear. And I said, Gordy, go out to the truck. I'll be out there in a minute. And so Lieutenant McCarthy said, hey, you guys go out there, let Central know that you're available for the job. If they deploy you, switch over to citywide frequency. Be careful and stay out of trouble. Because Gordy and I were always
in trouble.
I won't say trouble, but whatever shitstorm was blowing through Brooklyn, we were always like at the eye of that storm as it kind of made its way through. And so we did good work. We were just notorious for having that magnet attached to us.
A little extra.
So anyway, so we go out and we get on the radio, said, we got a full hazmat crew. We're available for the MCI. And they said, yeah, proceed down to One World Trade, report to the command post for further assignment at the corner of Vesey and West. So, okay, let's go. And at that point, they'd shut vehicular traffic going into the city, into Manhattan. But of course, emergency vehicles could go. So, cops are there blocking regular cars from going across. We're driving on the sidewalk and, pushing people out of the way. And next thing you know, we're on the bridge. We're going across, and I said, okay, obviously I can see a giant burning building here. I know my way around New York, like the main roads. But, once you get off them, some of these off-roads, we used to have these things they would call maps. Like we'd have to pull out this big map and you look at the grid and figure out how you get from place to place,
And everything's different now because of all the traffic and everything else.
So so I looked over at Gordy. I said, hey man, got to let me know which way we're going when we're on the side of the bridge, left, right, straight, like whatever. It's, I can see a big burning building on the bridge, but once you're in the valley, it's not like you look up and look, you're in the valley of giant buildings. So, he said, I don't know. I said, well, you're looking at the map, man. Like, you got to tell me. And he's like, I can't see it. And Gordy, I remember thinking on the way to that job, thank God I have this man with me because I'm going to battle. And, Gordy he was in the Marine Corps, did 4 years in the Marine Corps and then transferred to the Army for 3 because he was attached to a unit called CBERF, which was a biological incident response force. And because of that, he was a hazmat specialist, which was a degree, which was a level above where I was just as a technician. And so this is the guy, like he literally retired from the military. The next day he starts the academy for the fire department. And when he came out, because of his specialty, he was able to get tied to our unit. And so I'm like, thank God I got Gordy with me. Mm-hmm. He was a maniac. He is a maniac. But like, that's the guy wanting to trench with me.
Right.
And he was just staring at the building. He's like, I can't see, man. Like just getting, circuits were getting overwhelmed. And about that point, there's an unmarked RMP coming up behind us. And I said, well, let's just follow this guy. He's either going to the same job we are, or there's something crazy going on somewhere else that, we'll follow him to something. And so anyway, we get off the bridge and we make our way down and we get into the complex of the trade center. And by that point, it's pandemonium. It's just thousands of people running down the street. Of course, there's all kinds of traffic on the radio. And in New York, the way that the radios would work was that, you could key up and start talking.
But somebody could walk over.
Somebody could step on you. So, if you keyed up because you had something important to say, well, next thing you know, that transmission's getting stepped on. And then that was constantly happening because everybody had something really important to say. Hey, someone just jumped out a window. Hey, this is coming in. Like things are falling off the building. So all this kind of stuff was going out. It was crazy, man. So you almost turned
up. Yeah.
So I ended up getting down to the corner of Church Street and Liberty Street. And there was a highway sergeant there for the police department.
Okay.
Like I said, looking like Ponch and John, got the helmet, the big black boots, the whole thing,
Yeah.
So I said, hey, Sarge, you have any idea where we're getting deployed? Where we're supposed to get stationed? I don't know where we're going. He said, man, I have no idea. He's like, there's no way I can get on the radio. He's like, I tell you what, though, there's a bunch of people that are hurt real bad down in the 10 house. So I said, well, where's that? And what he was referring to was the quarters of Engine 10 and Ladder 10. One of only 2 houses in New York City Fire Department that with a engine and the ladder have the same number.
Okay.
So it was just down Liberty Street. He said, man, there's a bunch of people hurt there. And we ended up going down there. And so that firehouse.
Treating people down there.
Right. So that firehouse is directly across the street from the South Tower.
Okay.
Which had not been struck. Which gets struck as soon as we get there. So at that point, we had gotten in and we talked to the captain of the house and we're like, hey, man, like we're at your disposal. We don't know where the hell we're supposed to go at this point. We're supposed to go to World Trade 1. We're now across the street from World Trade 2. And he said, look, all my CFR guys are on the engine. They're already deployed around the corner. I don't have anybody. He's like, I have a house full of injured people here.
Oh, okay.
And some of them are hurt pretty bad, a lot of trauma. And he's like, if you guys could do anything to mitigate this until we can get some extra resources here, this would be great place to start. I said, okay. And of course
so y'all start triaging.
Yes.
Okay.
Pulling out MCI tags, the whole thing. Well, it's strange with trauma. And when you're in high stress kinds of traumatic incidents like that, like different things that you experience and, like the gaps in time or whatever else, auditory exclusion. I remember hearing people screaming, but I never heard the South Tower getting hit.
Because you were into your mode.
And I was locked in, but I could hear and I could see everybody looking up. And I came out towards the front of the firehouse and I could see the fire, the explosion and all. I'm like, oh man. And really at that point, it had changed for me because the whole time I'm like, I'm going down to this job. It's going to be huge. It's going to be awesome. Awesome in a gruesome way. Not to be morbid.
But you trained for this.
Yeah.
And you're like, all right.
Like I'm prepared to go. This is the fight that I trained for. And, but in fire and EMS, you respond to things. Something's happened and you get there and you go deal with what's happened.
Right.
This was something that was continuing to happen. And at that point, it was like, like this thing is not done yet. Like we're still under attack, Right. So, we had put out to that point to our dispatch, we had to kick back over to one of our regular channel because the citywide channel is too crazy. And I said, hey, we're going to try to set up some triage on the south side of the complex, direct all ambulatory people to the 10 house and, get us some additional resources to be able to get people out and out of there. And it wasn't long after that, there was a couple firemen come running into the apparatus bay doors. They holler in, they say, help, we need a medic. A brother's been hurt up the street. And then they go, whoosh, take off. So I grabbed 2 other firemen and a Stokes basket. And I go out to go after these guys. Well, Gordy says, I'm coming with you. I said, Gordy, wait in here. I'll be right back. I said, there's nobody else. Somebody's got to stay to take care of all these people. I said, don't worry, but I won't be long. Because really at that point, we had seen a lot of initial, trauma from things falling off the building, hitting people, whatnot. After the second plane hit, we saw a lot of burns. Okay. Bad ones. I mean, like skin falling off people's arms kind of stuff. I mean, it was pretty gruesome. And I said, Gordy, you got to stay here, man. I'll be back in a minute. So we end up going down the street. And I remember, several things from that point. The first thing was, in my career in public service, I mean, it's coming up on 30 years now. I've been to all kinds of jumper calls, right? In fire service, they'd be either jump up or jump down. That's how they get classed. Because if they would jump up, did somebody stand on a ledge, thinking about it, you figure out what they're going to do, and then you respond from there. Jump down meant that they made the decision. And of course, you were never really going there to render aid. But in the city, the fire department's responsible for picking up dead people in public view. So, I've been to jumper calls. I've seen what the result of that is. But in all my time in emergency service, before or after, I've never had to worry about dodging them.
Yeah.
And from the time that I left the firehouse to the time I eventually make my way back, I had 7 jumpers land probably 20, 30 feet from me. And so, we go out and initially, just looking up, because the building is so tall, you can't see the top of it until you're back a couple blocks.
Okay.
And it's hard for people to understand if you've never been near a high rise like that. But, I remember
disappearing.
Yeah, and I'm in fire school. They teach you that the collapse zone of a building is 1.5 times its height.
Okay.
Well, how do you calculate 1.5 times the height of a building you can't see the top of? And I remember thinking, God, if this building falls down, I hope it falls down like a big tree in the other direction.
Right.
Because I was like, it's huge. It was an acre for every floor of that building. There's 110 of them.
Oh.
It's hard for people, I think, to digest the actual size of those buildings. But anyway, so we're looking up because, of course, you have things constantly falling off the building.
Right.
Steel, glass, concrete, people. And, looking not to get hit by anything.
So could you, I know sounds morbid, but like, could you hear him coming?
Scream the whole way down.
Okay.
Scream the whole way down. It's horrible. And then, you almost, I don't know if you get conditioned by, Looney Tunes, the Roadrunner and the Coyote, they hit the ground, kind of, people are like water balloons, from that height at that speed, just hit the ground and it's just, I don't know, explode. It's and obviously you got, a person, 150, 200 pounds coming at you of terminal velocity. You don't want to get hit by that. And there were guys that got killed by people falling off the buildings, jumping out of the buildings.
What was the chaplain or something?
Chaplain, yeah, Father Judge. So we're kind of walking out like this, and as we're getting down to where this guy was, I remember at one point I was kind of looking for what I expected to see. My initial anticipation was going to go out there and it was just going to be stuff everywhere, and it really wasn't at first. A lot of smoke, things on fire, but I didn't really see that the biological debris. So I started walking a little bit more, and then I slipped. And when I went to see what I slipped on, then that's when I started to get to, that biological debris, and it was somebody's head. And I remember I stopped, I kind of paused and I looked, and it was just carpeted. It wasn't like, sort of walking through the minefield, hoping not to squish through something. It was like, you got to walk through it. And I remember
that's it. And is that from jumpers or a combination?
That was from the plane in the building.
Yeah.
And the reason why I know that for sure, other than the mass of it, the actual volume of it, was there's one point where I stopped and I looked, and it felt like a long time. It was probably just a second or two, where I thought, what could do that? It's one thing, I kind of expected to see an arm, hand. By that point, I'd been involved in, responding to all kinds of stuff. And, I've seen all manner of trauma, but not on that scale. And like I said, there's things you expect to see. But, I was looking at stuff and I'm like, what could do that to a person? And there's one child that ended up getting killed down there. And I tell you, it's strange because, in hindsight, you think about like, what would I do? What do I do different and all this? And just the weird kind of things you think about and entertain. But there's a child's foot, and, of course, in hindsight, doing the research, like I know whose foot that is. Everything else is sort of indiscriminate. It could be anybody. And, odd enough, like, like one of my regrets is like, I didn't grab a foot and like put it in my pocket, because I don't know that family ever had a chance to bury that kid. And, but anyway, so we're in this mess, and like, all right, we got to keep trudging through because I mean, we're out there, we're on a mission.
Yeah.
I mean, we just, and I remember thinking like, I'm gonna have to think about this later because this is crazy, but kept pushing through. And we got to, hell, I don't know, we were maybe 30 feet from where this guy was, and he got hit in the head with something from the building. And
a fireman.
Yeah, it was a fireman. And he, I could see there were other firemen who were around him, and they picked him up on a longboard, and they were carrying him away from where we were. And when they picked him up, I could see that he had received a mortal wound to his head. They were taking a body away. And so I knew that there was nothing that I could do. And I remember to the two guys I was with, I said, let's just get back inside. We're gonna get killed out here. Like this shit was constantly just raining off the building, you know? And so we did, and we started making our way back. And we got back probably about halfway, and there was one of those little carts, you know, they sell coffees and butter rolls and all kinds of stuff. And it was locked up, and we broke the lock off. I said, look, man, we're going to be here probably 24 hours. Who knows when we're going to get relief? Let's just get some waters and stuff like that. We're going to need to start rehabbing people. So we took out a milk cart, chunk out all the milk and the butter and all that, filled it up with like waters and Snapples, gave it to the one guy. He runs it into the firehouse, start doing a second thing. And I was probably, hell, I don't know, 3 or 4 bottles of water into that thing. And I heard this sound, and it's hard to describe, honestly. You know, I mean, it was like as gifted a wordsmith as I could be at times. The closest thing I could think is if you imagine standing on the runway of an airport, and so you're at LaGuardia, and then there's a 747 dive bombing you. And as it's coming straight to wherever you're standing, they're pulling back on the thrusters towards you. That's what it sounded like. And in my mind, I never looked up. I mean, I'm standing from here to the wall to the building that's about to, you know, collapse down on top of me. And, but I never looked up. I just looked at the other guy I was with, and it was just run. And the two of us started to run. And, you know, one of those other, you know, trauma type of, you know, responses was that time slows down. You know, sometimes people say time will speed up. Sometimes it says slow down. You know, I think that your processor, it just starts getting overwhelmed with so much information that, you know, you're perceiving that processing at a different speed. And I remember running like I was running through oatmeal. Like just, you know, that dream when you're trying to run away from somebody, but you can't get your legs to work. Like it felt like that, but in real life. And we ran towards this firehouse. And inside this firehouse, all the other people that could got up and ran away from this horrible sound too. And the guy that was in front of me, I don't know who he was, so I don't mind embarrassing him. So it's just some random fireman. But he runs, and there's a Chinese guy that's on the floor, and he has a fractured pelvis, so he can't get up and run. So he's kind of dragging his bottom half like he was like an animal that gets hit on the side of the road, you know. And he hurdled him. And I'll never forget that as soon as he hurdled him, the first thing I thought was, oh shit, now I gotta pick him up. And so I'm running, and I kind of grab a hold of this dude. His name is Fu. So I grab a hold of Fu, and you know, we had put this, they call it a KED. It's an extrication device. Well, if you turn it over, it's meant for taking people out of a car. But if you turn it over, you can actually use it to stabilize a pelvic fracture. It's not what it was designed for, but it works. So anyway, we would put this thing on him. And I grabbed him by the KD, and I grabbed him by his shirt or jacket, and just kind of went to pull back like this. And as soon as I did, I get hammered. And you know when you're at the beach and you get hit by a wave you don't see coming, and then you're just going along for the ride, you don't know which way is up or down. So I'm no physicist or engineer, but as that building comes down from the south tower, the top portion of the building falls south towards where we are, and the rest of it comes straight down. And as it's coming straight down to the ground, it's just releasing this wave of energy and pressure. And it rips Fu out of my hands. I go deeper into the firehouse, hit my head, and I hit the ground, and I could feel it pressing me down against the ground. And
how big is that firehouse? Is it big enough where it's the size of a gymnasium or something?
No. I mean, it was wide enough to put, you know, an engine and a ladder. I mean,
so it wasn't a big building.
No,
but it would shove. So did it shove you all the way to the other wall, or
probably I don't know, 15, 20 feet into
Okay.
deeper into the firehouse. I know I was standing near the rear wheel well of the ambulance that we drove there.
Mm-hmm.
And I got pictures I'll send you. I mean, the thing is completely crushed. It's just destroyed. And, you know, I ended up deeper into the firehouse in the apparatus bay. And I could feel it pushing me down. I could feel things coming past me. I get hit in the face, you know, bleeding, and ended up breaking my nose and you know, had all kinds of soft tissue injuries. And just the roar of it, you know, just kind of riding it out. And then all of a sudden it just stopped.
Totally silent.
It was complete silence. You know, it was complete blackness. And, you know, the old days in the fire service, what they would do before they had Scott packs and all that, you know, the old school guys who, you know, all died young because they had lung cancer and God knows what, you know, they would breathe one of two ways, either through their armpit or down at the ground. They go in, they'd be fighting a fire.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they had to breathe, they just get real close to the ground, and, you know, it'd be an inch or two of air that was breathable, I guess. And they go down and hold their breath and come back up again. I mean, hardcore dudes.
Yeah.
And I'm against the ground, and there was no inch of anything. You know, of course, unbeknownst to me, you know, all over Manhattan now is covered in this thick dirt dust cloud. Now, my mind, a plane just crashed out in front of the firehouse, and, you know, like I'm just in the Hollywood black smoke of it, and I'm just waiting for it to go up, and I just got to get out of the building and get a fresh air from outside. And I remember thinking I said, I have one breath that I need to take advantage of, and I need to use that breath to find fresh air.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember thinking, all right, I got to get to a Scott pack. I got to get to my truck. But then I realized I don't have my truck. I got an ambulance. I don't think I have Band-Aids in it. Had nothing. I said, all right, I'm in a firehouse, but the engine and the ladder, you know, the truck is around the corner, and the pump is around the corner. So I realized, like, there's no option with that. And I'm like, I got to breathe. And I tried to breathe through my jacket. But it was like someone took a shovel of dirt and put it right down my throat. And then as soon as of course you breathe that in, and your response says,
And then you're sucking in again.
which draws the next breath. And by about that point, everybody else in that firehouse was in the exact same situation. Complete terror. Can't breathe, can't see. And, you know, you hear the screaming. And I said, I got to get out of this building. I just got to, again, my mind's eye, just got to find the back door. Outside there's sunshine and fresh air. And, of course, there was none.
So how much debris did you have on top of you pushing you down?
So a lot of that, I think, was the pressure. What ends up happening is that debris fills the front part of the firehouse. And so I'm in the firehouse. So the structure, you know, 100% saved my life. Now the firehouse itself ended up sustaining a lot of structural damage. In fact, that firehouse didn't reopen until like November of 2003. But it saved me, you know, structurally. It kept, you know, all the other
Because
stuff.
all the debris started filling up, and
Yeah. And it was everybody else, Juette, that was on the street. You know, when I was looking back, just instantly snuffed out. They're all gone. And so, you know, I get up and I start trying to move, and I end up falling behind. It was a Port Authority guy. He was a boss. And I knew he was a boss because if I get real close, I could see his shirt, and it was white.
Mm-hmm.
In New York, you know, the bosses wear white shirts because they don't get dirty.
Yeah.
You know, they're busy telling everybody else what to do. So I know falling behind this guy, and he's moving, and I'm like, maybe he knows where. I don't know. I've never been in this firehouse before. I'm like, I don't know where I'm going. But this guy's in motion. I said, there's a man with a plan.
Follow.
It's my lead blocker, and I'm moving. And I imagine what hell is like. And I feel like I got a taste of it because the terror, you know, that comes with not being able to breathe. I could feel people that I was walking on screaming, grabbing at me, everybody yelling for help. And I remember thinking to myself, does anybody know the way out of here? You know, just like, all right, you know, let me go out, let me regroup, and then I'll come back to help, you know? Well, we ended up stopped, and he turns around and starts walking into me because the back portion of the firehouse was damaged, and there was no way out. And then I heard Gordy come over the radio with a mayday, you know, central help, you know, we've been, you know, we have heavy casualties, we can't breathe, send help, and all these, so it's putting out this blood curdling mayday. I said, God, I got to find Gordy. And I start kind of making my way back to the firehouse and ended up bumping into him. And when I did, I remember he came up and, of course, he gives me a big bear hug. And he's like, holy shit, dude, I thought you were dead. And I said, yeah, me too. And I said, look, dude, we need to come up with a game plan because like we're not in a good situation here.
So kind of describe what it was like. So you had like, once you stood up, you had room, but it was still dirty.
Couldn't hardly see a thing.
You couldn't see anything.
Yeah, I mean, it was
almost like being in a fire without fire.
Yep, exactly. Without the heat.
Without the heat.
But you couldn't see anything. And, eventually, like we had like streamlight flashlights. And I remember it was like a lightsaber because you get like a 2.5 foot beam off that thing, but it couldn't penetrate. The air quality was so thick with this dirt, smoke, dust, God only knows what else. And so I remember, Gordy and I were close, and I said, "Look, man, we need to come up with a game plan. Like we got to dig our way out of this thing and make a run for Brooklyn, or like whatever we need to do. We need to be on the same page." And he said, "There is only one option." And I remember he grabbed me by my jacket, and he said, "I'm not dying in here with these people today." I said, "That's fair." I said, "But go down. What are we going to do? I mean, we can't leave everybody in here." And so, we kind of made a pack. And I remember at the time, there were people I remember yelling. I could hear them yelling, medic, help, help. And I'm like, hold on a second. And I said, Gordy, we're the last two people out of this building. Whatever comes of it, like we're the last two guys out. And
right.
I said, I could live with that. And that's what we did. And we just went back into treatment mode. I remember at one point, I was setting, it was a fireman's leg. He had an open tib fib fracture. And I remember as I was setting it, of course he's screaming, and he leaned up and he looked at me and he said, "Brother, you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm okay." He's like, "Well, you're bleeding really bad." And at that point we had found some paper masks, and I pulled it off and it was full of blood. And like I said, I'd broken my nose, and I said, "Look, man, it doesn't hurt yet. I'll worry about it when it hurts. Let's get you squared away and we'll take care of it then." And we did. We ended up making contact with a team on the outside of the building, able to pass that guy through.
Oh, so you, at some point there, you found an escape route.
We did.
Okay.
And so it was on the back side of the building, away from the complex. And so we started directing ambulatory people out of there. In fact, we had gotten to a point where there were 4 people left in that building. It was me, captain of the house, Captain Kelty, Gordy, and Fu, right? This poor Chinese guy that couldn't get up. Like, there was no way for us to get him out of there at that point. The hurdle. And poor Fu could hardly speak English. And he was, begging for us to get. I said, "Fu, don't worry, guy. You're my number one guy." He said, "You're my number one guy. First ambulance that gets here, you're out of here." And, meanwhile, this poor bastard's on the floor just in all kinds of pain. He's got the only schmuck that can talk to him is telling him, "Yeah, you're my number one guy." And we just keep walking past him. Anyway, so we get to this point, and I remember walking back out towards the apparatus bay. It got a little bit easier to see. I could see this debris from the remains of the South Tower. And I remember shouting into that wall of debris, "Is there anybody in there? Can anybody hear us? Like if there's anything we could do to help extricate somebody out, we would," but got no response. I remember yelling it a couple of times. And then I heard this sound, and it was the North Tower collapsing. And it was the same sound that I heard before. And as soon as I heard it, my first thought was I fucked up. Like I had my shot. I had an opportunity to go, and I stayed too long. And so the 3 of us, me and Gordy and Kelty, we ended up running into a bathroom, and the 3 of us get on the floor in the corner of this bathroom, and Captain Kelty was to my left, and he was an older guy, but he was holding my hands, and I had fire gloves on, and he was holding my hands so tight, I thought he was going to break every bone in my hand. And Gordy's kind of wrapped up around my legs. And, I remember my head against the wall, and I thought, if this building comes down, like this helmet's not going to protect me. And I tilted it back. And the very next thought was, if I die in here and someone sees me with my helmet on like this, they're going to think I was retarded. So I kind of fixed it. And I remember just kind of being huddled up together with them and praying and just waiting.
Waiting to die.
You know, and it was different than the first go through. Because the first time I'm in motion the whole time. Like I don't have time to stop and think. Like things are happening.
This one you're waiting for.
This one I'm waiting.
And you already knew what it did.
And I know it's coming. And it gets loud. It's terrifying. I mean, it felt like it went on forever. I don't know how long it was, but eventually stops, same silence. Like it's just nothing. And I said, you guys hear that? And they said, what? I said, someone's taking a piss in here. And they said, what? I said, I hear someone taking a leak in here. You know, I don't pretend to be like, you know, some ultra, you know, brave, anything, you know, but like this is pretty calamitous.
I would say.
And I'm thinking to myself, who the hell is stopping in the middle of this thing for a potty break? Like it's like blowing my mind, you know? And
Right.
and I got up, and what happened was we were in the corner of this bathroom under a sink. And I guess the vibrations from the buildings coming down and shook loose one of the faucets. And it was just dribbling into the sink. And I remember I had to get real close to see what it was, and I turned it off. And as soon as I did, there were no trumpets from heaven. There was no neon signs. But I could tell you with as much clarity, it was like this message in my brain, and it was, you still have work to do. And it was amazing. It was like a slap in the face for me just to get back into reality. And, you know, I've told people that message is what carried me through everything else for the remainder of that incident. That message is what carried me out of bed in the days and weeks and months that followed, you know, when I would lay there and think, why bother? You know, like, you know, the survival guilt and all the rest of that kind of stuff that goes with, you know, that kind of experience. And, you know, I'm a firm believer when it's your time to go, it's your time to go.
Right.
But the reason why I had to get out of bed, the reason why I had to go back to work and do whatever needed to be done for that day is because I still have work to do. Yeah. And when the day comes, I got no more work to do. You know, then that's the day I'll hang it up. And
so what you kind of described what happened for you. How long was it? I know you lost your dad that day, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How long was it that you figured out what had happened to him? And I think people, I know when you have somebody and you're looking for a missing person and stuff like that, I don't know the story. So what was the story with what happened with your father?
So I ended up eventually, it's probably about 4:00 in the afternoon. By the time I get down to the piers, ended up getting a ride from NYPD back to Brooklyn. From there, I get back to the station, of course, get back over there, and everybody's been recalled to work. I get in there, you know, my lieutenants are in there. My lieutenant that had sent me over to this job, McCarthy, come back and just crying. He's like, you know, I thought I sent you guys to your death. And I said, no, we're good, Lou. And, you know, my captain came in, you know, kind of grizzled old dude, and just, he's like, you know, you boys good? And I'm like, yes, sir, we're good. And he's like, where's my truck? I said, I got the keys. I said, that's about all that made it. And, so he's like, nah, it's fine. We'll take it out of your paycheck. And they ended up calling for ambulances for us to go to the trauma center because we were in bad shape by that point. And honestly, like I had some plan. I was going to get back to the station, get in my car, and then just drive out to the island or something. But I realized my keys were buried in the trade center. And so I couldn't even drive if I wanted to. And I couldn't have. I mean, I was done. No more adrenaline, no more blood sugar. I mean, I was up. I would work the whole night before. And I mean, I was tapped out. I was a victim. And I said, okay. So they ended up calling for 2 ambulances. Well, Gordy hears this. And, you know, this maniac's like, no. Because the agreement was that whatever we were going to do, we were not getting separated from that point forward. We were going to be attached at the hip. And Gordy was true to that pact. So they ended up sticking both of us in the back of one ambulance. Okay. And, you know, squeezed both of our big asses in that thing. And then, of course, get to the hospital. So we get sent to Kings County Medical Center, which is Kings County Hospital, is a trauma center in Brooklyn. And I've been in there many times, taking other people, treating other people. First and only time, thank God, I've been in there as a victim. And I will tell you what, the ass kicking I took in Lower Manhattan was a close contest between who kicked my ass even worse, because, you know, it sent me through the whole trauma regimen. And,
to check you out.
oh yeah.
Check your injury.
You know, I got to do all this stuff. And I'm here to tell you, if you've never had the experience of a Foley catheter while you're awake, I don't recommend it. It was this guy sweet talked me into it. He said, I said, man, I think I'm good. He's like, no, we're pumping you for a lot of pain meds, man. Like, you got to get this in. You got all these tests. I said, I don't know, man, I think I'm good. He's like, listen, you don't understand. I'm like magic with this thing. He's like, you're not even going to know I was there. And he seduced me. And he sweet talked me into this procedure. And I remember, maybe I'm being dramatic. I mean, this is the way I remembered it. But I remember screaming, and I remember the guy coming up underneath from under the sheet, and he was sweating. And he said, and I said, what the hell happened? I reached down, and his blood. And I'm like, what happened? He's like, oh, it was like this traumatic insertion and all this whole thing. I'm like, God bless. So after this, you know, eventually got to run me through all these tests with this thing. And, you know, again, like I said, if you've never experienced it, I don't recommend it. Unconscious people, do your thing. You know, they don't know. There's no worse for the wear. But I go through this, and eventually I said to the x-ray tech, so they had pulled in, at the time they were expecting waves of injured people. Mm-hmm. So every hospital had all these people come in, and they just weren't injured people.
Yeah.
And so I had some medical student that was in with me. I'm talking to the x-ray tech. He's kind of behind the screen or whatever else. And I said, hey, man, we've been at this for a while. I said, can I take this? Can we get this thing out? Like, it's really uncomfortable. He said, yeah. So he tells the med student, go ahead and take it out. So these things, you know, they stick it in as a little, and they pump up a little balloon in there to keep it from backing out. Well, you got to deflate this thing, or at least you're supposed to. Go ahead and rip this thing out. I thought I was going to die right there on the table. Screaming. So there was a fire captain that was outside the room and came in and like, what the hell are you guys doing in here? And I'm like, I had it. And by that point, they admit me to the hospital. I go up to my room, and for the first time, it was about, I don't know, maybe 8, 9 o'clock at night. For the first time, I found out that the buildings came down. Dude, I had no idea. I thought they were planes. You know, it's not like I look up. It was nothing I could see. And the sound, I thought they were planes. So I thought there were 4 planes that crashed. They all just happened to land right around me. And because what happened was they had a little arm like this with a TV attached to the bed. And I swing it over, and I'm looking at the screen, and I'm watching this unfold. And as bad as I thought it was
worse.
I was like, this is the worst day of my life. And right about that point, to answer your question, 2 of my lieutenants come in with my Lodi paperwork. And the phones were all messed up in New York. So the hospital had been trying to call my family to let them know that I was, you know, hospitalized. They ended up leaving like an answer machine message or something, back when we had answer machines. So they ended up calling in, and I had somebody from my family call and called the room, and they're like, hey, what's going on? I said, hey, I'm in the hospital. I said, I gotta get out of here. It's terrifying. They had opened the windows. All the smoke from Manhattan was coming in the hospital. Fighter jets were flying over the hospital. You know, so as you can imagine, like the noise of jet engines were terrifying me. You know, I want to jump under the bed every time they fly over, and it was constant. So it was this torture. And so I said, yeah, I'm gonna get out of here first thing I can in the morning. And they said, okay, well, have you talked to your dad? I said, no, he's probably busy telling someone where to go or what to do or whatever. I'm sure he's busy. I said, well, everyone's over at your stepmother's house. Nobody's heard anything from him since this morning. He went on this job. I said, okay. So I called down to his firehouse, and I got through. And, you know, the guy that was on house watch answered. He's like, you know, hazmat 288. And I said, yeah, can you tell me what the status of hazmat 1 is? So he says, who's calling? I said, well, it's Brian Smith. I'm Kevin Smith's son. I said, you know, I'm on the job. I was down at the Trade Center. They got me up at KCH right now, but I'm just trying to find out what's going on. And he just started screaming. You know, they're gone. They're all gone. He just like screaming. And I remember I held the phone away from my head, and that's about the time my lieutenants came in. And I remember they just kind of standing there looking at me. And I said, look, man, I don't know who put you in charge of answering the phone. I said, but somebody else probably needs to. I'm going to come by the firehouse in the morning. we'll see if we can sort all this out. I hung up the phone, and honestly, I wasn't really worried. And these guys, I remember my lieutenants looking at me, and I said, yeah, they said my dad's missing. And I said, he's fine. Like, me and Gordy were missing. Everybody's missing. Nobody knows what the hell's going on right now. Guys I went to the academy with, they were on a missing list, and they show up. And so that night, I didn't sleep. I was up the whole time. Thank God it was a little bed like this, because otherwise Gordy would have crawled up in there with me. He just pulled his chair up next to me, and the two of us snuggled up as best we could, and get released in the morning. My lieutenants get me back to the station. I could put clothes on because I cut all my clothes off, and so I ended up getting clothes, and then I got a ride from Brooklyn to Queens, my dad's firehouse. And I went in and I talked to the captain that was on duty. I said, hey, Cap, can you give me what's the scoop? He said, Brian, I'm gonna be honest with you. Because I told him, I was like, look, I'm not just family. I'm on the job. I'm obviously, you don't have to give me the watered down version. And he said, Brian, honestly, there's not a lot I could tell you. He said, I have a lot of guys that are unaccounted for at this point. He said, the last radio transmission we had from your dad and the group that he was with was on the 11th floor of the North Tower. He said, right after that transmission, the building came down. He said, your dad's a tough guy, man. He's, they got in all these pockets, cell phone signals and all the rest. And I said, I knew at that moment, what my dad's fate was. And of the 70 houses that lost personnel on 9/11 from the fire department, my dad's firehouse had the single greatest loss of life. The two companies that were in there, Squad 288, Hazmat 1, Hazmat had 11 guys that were killed, and the squad had 8, so 19 guys between the two companies out of that house. And of course, my dad being one of them. And so yeah, and they never recovered anything from my dad. We did the DNA stuff and hoping to get something. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not a cemetery guy. I don't go to cemeteries to go visit people. So it didn't seem that important to me. But as time went on, it was like, oh, maybe there'll be a funeral this weekend. Maybe the funeral next month. Maybe, all the time. And, at work, I was on a list that if they recovered anybody from either of those companies, I would get called down to the trade center and we'd go down and do the removal. And that's when I wasn't working regular shifts down at the trade center. You go down there and you'd have different jobs. You'd work the morgue for 2 hours. Then you go down and do removals, and you go down and you're doing digging, or you'd be a spotter, or, there's different jobs, and they kind of rotate you through them all. And, you just be digging in this muck, looking for human remains. And, most of the time, especially as time went on, you'd kind of dig through until you could start to smell something, or you'd find clothes, which would kind of give you an indication that you were near something. And, I just remember the whole time that I was down there, and really one of my bigger regrets in hindsight was just that I didn't put more time down there, because, I thought if the roles were reversed, I know my dad would be down here. And so, just went down and dealt with the morbidness of the way that whole thing was unfolding. But I will tell you, man, it was therapeutic, as nasty as all that stuff was at times, and really to people that are not in the business, it's hard for them to understand. Like, I was doing something at least.
Yeah, moving towards conclusion.
Yeah, and I was, rather than just kind of sitting through and just trying to process my trauma, so
worked out.
So anyway, that was that. And I was there until the very end, when the last day of the official last day of the recovery in May of 2002. And then, eventually wrapped up my career in fire and EMS when I came down to Virginia in November 2002, and ended up getting a job with a municipality down here, and I've been down here. It was 23 years.
So just to kind of wrap it up, I don't think people. I think the thing I struggle with the most when I hear stories like yours is how little the general public just respects the amount of you've sacrificed personally and your family has gone through because of 9/11 and just service in general. Mm. And I just think if people would have to live through just like a second of what you had to experience, would they look at things the same?
it's amazing to me. You know, right after 9/11, they stopped showing jumpers. It was like a day or two after. Too insensitive for viewers. We didn't want to upset people. And I remember thinking at the time, you know, people need to be upset. Like, these people died horrible deaths. You know, one of the most compelling things I think at the 9/11 museum is a little section in there, and it's kind of blocked off. You got to go around a little curtain and it says, you know, sensitive, whatever else. And there's pictures of jumpers. And there's a quote from somebody that was talking about observing somebody who was getting ready to jump. It was a female jumper. And right before she went, you know, like the wind blew her skirt up a little bit. And he pointed out how she, you know, just kind of straightened out her skirt. And the, you know, and how in that moment that they weren't just jumpers. They were people, you know, human beings with dignity. And, you know, even though they made the you know, that jump, and, you know, the terror that I felt paled in comparison. They looked down. It wasn't like anybody was thinking they were going to make it. And it wasn't a quick flight down, man. So, you know, to me, those people who don't have a voice, you know, even the language we use, like, you watch news footage today, and we'll talk about the 3,000 people that were lost on September 11th, as if they were wandering through the woods and just couldn't figure out how to get home. Just in the simple language that we use, you know, my dad's death certificate says homicide. He was murdered. Wow. Those people weren't just a victim of circumstance. They were murdered. People intended to murder them. And I think that when we start to, I don't call it sugarcoating, but, you know, just make it a little bit more palatable for people to digest how bad something like that really was, I think you do a disservice and a dishonor to the people that did make that ultimate sacrifice. You know, the ones that don't get to go home and tuck their kids in, you know, don't get to go home and, you know, walk their kid down the aisle or whatever the case may be, you know, whatever station they were in life, like, that's it, it's over. And, you know, and I don't know, it's, you know, to your point, I think that most people, just kind of, you know, floating on through life, just, maybe it's blissful ignorance. Maybe it's just easier to live life, not thinking about the evil that we're surrounded by, but it's reality, you know. And of course, in law enforcement, we see it every day, and you know, it's hard to, you know, not let that chew you up or see the rest of the world through that lens, because of course it's not all evil. It's not all broken. But there's a lot of it out there, and
we see the broken. I mean, I think that's the rough part, is we don't see it. You really have to dig to find the good. Yeah. And I think maybe that's what people are trying to stay away from. So, yeah, brother, I appreciate your time, man. Appreciate your service.
Well, thank you, Juette. That's high praise, man.